if you're not breaking things, you're not innovating. To me, the more stuff you've broken, the more innovative you've been.
Richard Stockton Rush III was an adventurer born into privilege. With family lineage going deep into American history, he was destined for a life of innovation, but somewhere along the line, he turned to exploitation over exploration. Today, we're diving deep into the life and mind of Stockton Rush to find out why he chose to put innovation over safety. To gain a better understanding, we first have to look into his upbringing and family history. Let's dive in. Richard Stockton Rush III was born on March 31st, 1962. He's a direct descendant of two signers of the Declaration of Independence, Dr. Benjamin Rush and Richard Stockton. Dr. Benjamin Rush was also known as the father of American psychiatry and was a prominent physician in early America. He earned this title for pioneering work in mental health, including publishing the first American textbook on psychiatry, medical inquiries, and observations upon the diseases of the mind. Now, as for Richard Stockton, he was a New Jersey native, a lawyer, and a judge that played a significant role in advocating for independence during the Revolutionary War. After signing the Declaration of Independence, he was captured by the British. He endured imprisonment and suffered greatly for his support of the American cause. Now, he had a couple things built in his honor, which is the Richard Stockton Rest Stop on the New Jersey Turnpike. It has his portrait, a statue, and a short story about his life. And then there's also the Richard Stockton College of New Jersey, which is named in his honor. Now, it doesn't stop there. So going on to his mother's side, his grandfather was oil magnate Ralph K. Davies, and his grandmother philanthropist was Lois M. Davies, the namesake of San Francisco Symphony Hall. Now, Ralph was a prominent industrialist and philanthropist in American history. During World War II, he served under President Franklin D. Roosevelt as the petroleum administrator for the United States. His job was pretty much to coordinate and regulate oil production and distribution that was supporting the war effort. Now, his wife, Lois M. Davies, was known for her dedication to the arts in San Francisco, most notably for her $4 million donation to construct the Davies Symphony Hall for the San Francisco Symphony, and this was completed in 1980. But that's not all. Now, interestingly enough, Stockton's wife, Wendy Rush, born Wendy Hollings Whale, has some very interesting lineage tying back to both American and Titanic history. So check this out. Now, Wendy is the great-great-granddaughter of Isidor and Ida Straus. You may have heard the names, but who were they? They were also called amongst some of the Titanic lovers as the real Jack and Rose. Among the 1,500 passengers who perished on board in 1912, they were some of the most prominent. They even had their own dedicated scenes in James Cameron's Titanic, which one of the most iconic scenes didn't even make it into the final production. So Isador Strauss was born February 6, 1845. Isidor was a Bavarian-born American businessman, politician, and co-owner of Macy's department store with his brother Nathan. Yes, that Macy's. So after the American Civil War, his family moved to New York City, where his father Lazarus Strauss convinced Roland Hussey Macy, the founder of Macy's, to allow Strauss and Sons to open a crockery department in the basement of his store. Isidor Strauss worked for his father's company, which became the glass and china department for Macy's. And then in 1888, he and his brother Nathan Strauss became partners of Macy's. And by 1896, Isidor and Nathan gained full ownership of Macy's. Needless to say, Isidor and Ida were some of the wealthiest passengers on board the Titanic. But the thing is, Isidor and Ida Straus were actually on holiday in the Riviera, and they decided to book a first-class ticket back to New York on board the RMS Titanic. So this wasn't an expected trip, it was actually a last-minute decision, but they boarded in Southampton and checked into first-class cabins C-55-57. Which cost them 221 pounds. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $42,000 in today's money. Now, when Stockton first got the idea to begin guided tours to the Titanic in 2018, adjusted for inflation, that would cost over $130,000 back in 2018 money, before he climbed that price up to $250,000 in 2023. So just an interesting fact there for you guys. Now, we're going to touch more on that in part 2, so make sure you guys are subscribed. Going back to Isador and Ida Straus, this trip must have felt like stepping into the future. A chance to travel on the ship hailed as the Queen of the Ocean, the Titanic would easily be dwarfed by modern cruise ships today, but back then, this was a cutting-edge vessel. Renowned for its elegance and innovation, promising luxury and the ultimate adventure as they set sail on its historic maiden voyage. Now, Isidor and Ida weren't alone. Traveling with them were Isidor's manservant, John Farthing, and Ida's newly employed maid, Ellen Bird. Now, here's a look at the only photo of their cabin. Here we can see some of the renderings of the cabin and what it might have looked like back then. But just take a look at the amazing craftsmanship and attention to detail on all this wood trim. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing, but would you pay $130,000 today to take a ride on a ship like that? Now, during the sinking of the vessel, Ida was directed to lifeboat number 8, but there was only one seat left, and she refused to board if Isidor could not accompany her, stating her famous quote, "Where you go, I go," was incorporated into the filming of the Titanic.
We've been together for 40 years, and where you go, I go.
It was reported that crew members repeatedly attempted to direct Ida into available lifeboats, but she had chosen her fate, stating, "I will not be separated from my husband. As we have lived, so we will die together." Now that's love. Despite anxious pleading and tearful attempts at persuasion from residents to board lifeboat number 8, and even from Isidor himself, Ida stood strong and instead gave her fur coat to her maid, Ellen Bird, saying that she had no further use of it and instructed Ellen to take her seat on the lifeboat. And so they sat down on deck chairs under the stars, surrounded by havoc and turmoil. And the couple was last seen holding hands. Their amazing story of their love for one another was captured in the movie's iconic scene, which was kept in the final production, where they remained holding one another as their suite began flooding with ice-cold water. Ida's body was sadly never found, so the family collected water from the wreck site and placed it in an urn in the mausoleum. Ellen Bird was the only survivor of their group. Wendy Rush's great-great-grandparents lived a love story immortalized in Titanic history, a connection that adds an almost poetic layer to the Titan submersible tragedy. Maybe there was an irresistible force calling them across generations, only to claim more lives in its shadow. Stockton Rush's father, Richard Stockton Rush II, was a long-standing member and, at one point, the president-elect for the Bohemian Club, a San Francisco-based gentleman's club that owns the infamous Bohemian Grove. If you've heard of it, you're aware of the very long, prominent, and sometimes weird and conspiratorial history and reputation. They've been captured on film having rituals dressed in robes, worshiping an owl god, surrounded by fire. And if you're unaware of what the Bohemian Grove is, it's a private retreat and a gathering spot on 2,700 acres surrounded by redwoods in Northern California. Bohemian Grove is owned by the Bohemian Club, an exclusive organization founded in 1872. Members include influential figures from politics, business, and the arts. The retreat is infamous for its secrecy and cremation of care ceremony, where a symbolic effigy is burned to represent the shedding of worldly concerns. Now, it's also alleged that actual sacrificial rituals have been performed there. The Grove has hosted U.S. presidents, the Rockefellers, and other leaders, sparking intrigue and conspiracy theories due to its mysterious traditions. Here are just some of the notable members over the years: Clint Eastwood, Harry Kissinger, Walter Cronkite, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Charles Schwab, and Mark Twain. Over the years, the Grove has become increasingly inaccessible and less active, which lends further mystery to the events and their participants. Man, I love college. Hey! Growing up in a wealthy San Francisco family, Rush's childhood dream was to be an astronaut. His parents assumed he would grow out of this phase, but he never did. Now, Stockton's father was friends with Pete Conrad, who was the commander of the Apollo 12 and the first manned Skylab mission. When Stockton met the astronaut, he advised the teenage math whiz to get his pilot's license. So, in 1981, at age 19, Rush became the youngest jet transport rated pilot in the world when he obtained his DC-8 type captain's rating at the United Airlines Jet Training Institute. He then signed up to fly chartered planes in and out of Saudi Arabia, all while studying aerospace engineering at Princeton. Stockton said it was the coolest summer job, and for his college thesis, he designed a high-speed, ultralight aircraft. In 1984, he graduated with a bachelor's in aerospace engineering from Princeton. Now, Rush's time at Princeton also involved a series of arrests. In 1981, when Rush was a freshman, he was arrested for possession of a controlled and deadly substance, which was 2.5 grams of the devil's lettuce, and what I imagine were a couple of dime bags. The officer claimed that the drugs were in plain view on the front seat. Now, officially, the charges were later acquitted for lack of evidence, but what really happened is Rush was given a 6-month conditional discharge, meaning that the arrest would be removed from his record if he did not commit another offense during his 6 months of probation. Well, more than 6 months later, Rush was charged by police with drunk driving after driving a Volkswagen into the Dinky. The Dinky is the train that connects Princeton University to Princeton Junction. A power box on the side of the train car was damaged in the accident, putting the Dinky out of operation. The Volkswagen was totaled, and both Stockton and the passenger received minor injuries. Now, in his junior year, he again made headlines after taking part in what is apparently known as an undergraduate tradition in that era. It's a drinking game also known as the 21 Club. So, as reported by the Daily Princetonian, the college newspaper, on October 4th, 1982, the game was played by 5 junior men from each of the 4 selective clubs: Ivy, Cap and Gown, Cottage, and Tiger Inn. The 21st member is chosen at large by the initiates, held in the parking lot behind Cap with a full moon watchfully presiding. The initiations entailed 21 official chugs plus 6 introductory chugs and several unofficial toasts. Rush was apparently the first entrant that year to be disqualified. The Daily Princeton said, quote, 7 beers in, Talk gave the first boot, and Talk was his college nickname. But his fast times at Princeton didn't stop Stockton from pursuing his dream of becoming an astronaut. I mean, after some brushes with the law and a few slaps on the wrist, it rather likely reinforced a dangerous sense of invincibility, or may have nurtured a belief that rules and limits were bendable. A mindset that we would later see in his high-stakes decisions, all under the guise of innovation and exploration. Now, while he was in college, Rush also kept a private plane at the Princeton airport. Rush took 2 of his classmates on a last-minute flight to Cape Canaveral to see the launch of the Columbia Space Shuttle in April 1981. Rush flew them through the night in one direction and through the rain and turbulence in the other. Dave Siebert was a classmate who was on board the plane and recalled, quote, "He just seemed calm and poised beyond his age. Nothing really rattled him," end quote. David said that trip was one of the greatest adventures of his life. Shortly after this, Stockton's astronaut dream was unfortunately cut short when Rush learned that his eyesight wasn't good enough for him to become a military pilot. Now, in the 1980s, becoming a military pilot was the astronaut fast track. So after graduation, Rush moved to Seattle and then joined the McDonnell Douglas Corporation as a flight test engineer on their F-15 program. During this time, he spent 2 years at Edwards Air Force Base on a radar test program and anti-satellite missile program as the sole full-time representative of McDonnell Douglas. Later on, in 1989, Rush personally built a Glasair 3 experimental aircraft. This was a kit that came with a 680-page manual, or as Stockton put it, quote, "You start on page 1 of the manual, and by the time you get to page 680, you have a plane." End quote. But this plane used fiberglass and composites, which, according to reporter David Pogue, Stockton was allegedly criticized for using these materials. But nonetheless, he pushed forward, completing the aircraft and proving his naysayers wrong. Stockton still owned and flew the experimental craft until his death in 2023. But still, he dreamed of going into space, perhaps as a passenger on one of the private rockets being developed in the early 2000s by the likes of Richard Branson. In fact, Rush once again traveled to witness a space launch, this time to the Mojave Desert in 2004 to watch the launch of SpaceShipOne, the first commercial craft sent into space. But when Branson stood on its wing and declared that a new era of space tourism had arrived, Rush says that he abruptly lost interest. Quote, "I had this epiphany that this was not at all what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go up into space as a tourist. I wanted to be Captain Kirk on the Enterprise. I wanted to explore," end quote. After his time at McDonnell Douglas, he then went on to business school and built on his inherited money. He invested in a string of tech companies. He served on the board of directors for Seattle's Blueview Technologies, a manufacturer of a small high-frequency sonar system. If you've watched our other OceanGate videos, you've seen these are the sonar systems that were used on the Titan sub. In 2012, Rush was involved in Blueview's acquisition by Teledyne Inc., who's a leading provider of cutting-edge subsea technologies. They're a company that I'm actually familiar with because they make underwater ultrasonic thickness testing devices and things like that we use for underwater inspections. He also served as a board member for Entomo, which was an enterprise software developer, and as a chairman of Remote Control Technology Inc., or RTC. This was a manufacturer of wireless remote control devices for several Fortune 500 industrial clients, including Exxon, ConocoPhillips, and Boeing. And from 2003 to 2007, he served on the board of trustees for the Museum of Flight in Seattle. Now, Rush had also been quite the fanatic scuba diver. From the time that he was a teenager, he had ventured to the Red Sea, the Cayman Islands, and even Tahiti. And suddenly it dawned on him that Seattle had excellent cold water diving. Rush said, quote, "Puget Sound is full of nutrients, so you have sharks and whales and crabs and dolphins and seals and anemones. It's an absolutely incredible place to dive, except for that it's freezing," which I can definitely attest to. Here in the Puget Sound, we have to wear thick gloves, dry suits. If you want to dive longer than 45 minutes, you need multiple scuba tanks. So you guys know I'm a commercial diver, and if we're diving in the winter, I am throwing hand warmers inside of my dry suit to keep warm. It's not for the faint of heart out here, but Stockton is correct. The diving is amazing, and in the summertime, it's even common to see six-gill sharks at one of the local dive sites out here. Now, Stockton was put off by all this. He says, quote, "I loved what I saw, but I thought there's got to be a better way. And being in a sub and being nice and cozy and having a hot chocolate with you beats the heck out of freezing and going through a 2-hour decompression hanging in deep water." So the next obvious step was to rent a submarine, right? Well, he was shocked to find that there were fewer than 100 privately owned subs in the world at that time, and only a few were available for charter. He then tried to buy one, but was unsuccessful. Instead, a London company offered to sell him parts for a mini sub that could be built using blueprints by retired U.S. Navy submarine commander George Kittrege. He completed it in 2006, a 12-foot long tube in which the pilot lays flat on his stomach and looks out a plexiglass window while manipulating control levers and cruising at a max speed of 3 knots. He completed a heavily modified Kittrege K350, which was a 2-man submersible, in which he conducted over 30 dives in. This Kittrege K350 has quite the resemblance and shape to the Cyclops and Titan submersibles, doesn't it? Perhaps this is where Stockton got the idea to go cylindrical versus a sphere. And just for a quick backstory on Kittrege Industries, this is from Wikipedia. Kittrege Industries was founded in 1970 to design and manufacture midget submarines, completing 49 submersibles before manufacture was wound down in 1988. Kittrege's designs included the K250 and K350, named for their maximum rated depth in feet. He is known as the father of personal submersibles. He retired from the Navy in 1962. Now, Rush recalled his first dive in the submersible, saying, "While I was building the sub, I was thinking, this is stupid. I should have just bought a robot and explored with that. But the moment I went underwater, I was like, oh, you can't describe this. When you go down in a sub, things sound different, they look different. It's like you've gone to a different planet." Rush was hooked on the underwater world, and his entrepreneurial instincts were piqued. He says, quote, "I had come across this business anomaly that I just couldn't explain. If 3/4 of the planet is water, how come you can't access it?" Stockton Rush lived a life of ambition and the relentless pursuit of innovation. Perhaps his fascination with the ocean was the turning point he was looking for, a new frontier to explore or possibly exploit. In the next episode, we'll dive into the rise of OceanGate, the bold promises they made, and the controversies that followed. Subscribe, stay tuned, and dive safe. Thanks, you guys.